Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering woke capitalism collapses as investors pull billions and ESG threatens the food supply. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Coming from the dailymail.com, woke capitalism funds collapsed by $13 billion last year. Investors flee trendy ESG investments over low returns, greenwashing, and backdoor leftist agenda. Investors are starting to figure out not only does this not give you a good investment return, but it's also pushing a political agenda. From CNN Business, ESG investing is dying on Wall Street. Here's why. From Forbes, most Americans still unclear about what ESG means, according to a survey. You think that's bad? From City AM, more Brits believe in aliens than understand ESG, according to new polls. From the Washington Examiner, how ESG mandates might hurt the planet. From Fox Business, costly ESG standards, climate policies will ultimately reduce food and energy supplies. We need food and we do also need energy. We're human beings. ESG is anti-human. From the PrincetonTory.com, go woke and go broke, why ESG is doomed to fail. And from ESG Dive, Disney says ESG policies could cut into profits. Oklahoma State Treasurer said the filing proves taking environmental, social, and governance factors into account diminishes shareholder returns. And that's why America First Legal is suing Target. America First Legal files amended shareholder complaint against Target for radical ESG and DEI policies. Because these policies are not good for business, they hurt shareholders, they hurt consumers, they ultimately hurt employees. What's the whole point? Investors pulled $5 billion from sustainable funds in the fourth quarter alone, so the last 3 months of last year. The scale of sell-offs in the US offset even the inward inflows of ESG posted in Europe. US sustainability funds, which conservatives have derided as woke capitalism, saw their worst year on record in 2023, with investors pulling $13 billion from US funds, according to Morningstar. That multi-billion-dollar exodus in the US more than offsets the inward flows seen in Europe, dragging down the market globally. In the fourth quarter alone, investors withdrew $5 billion from funds that promote environmental, social, and governance efforts, making the fifth straight quarter of net outflows. According to Morningstar, a financial services firm, investors exited ESG amid fears of poor returns, a hidden leftist agenda, and greenwashing, or making a firm appear more environmentally friendly than it is, because there's fraud built into this. It's not just fraud for the solar panels and going green agenda. It's fraud because they call funds ESG when they're not even really ESG. So what's the point of investing in this? ESG refer to standards to guide investment towards socially conscious firms. For example, by funding wind farms to combat climate change while pulling out of harmful oil and tobacco giants. The strategy gets more controversial when it guides funding to firms promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion schemes, which irk conservatives who say they help women and minorities by sidelining white men, which of course is absolutely true. It also takes companies away from focusing on merit, and when you're not focusing on merit, you're damaging the whole organization and you're destroying people's individual future careers in business because they can't get by on their skin color or their gender or their sexual preference forever. DEI is a fad. It's going to be disappearing. It's already disappearing. So you don't want people mixed into industry who aren't qualified for the position. It has nothing to do with what they look like or their gender. This has spawned a fractious debate about whether efforts to make society fairer and cut carbon emissions are in the strategic interest for investors by mitigating the risks of climate chaos and social disorder. Alyssa Stankiewicz, featured prominently on my thumbnail, and a sustainability researcher at Morningstar, said ESG investments faced strong macroeconomic headwinds last year. Global supply constraints, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and high interest rates left renewable energy firms less profitable. Investors walked away from ESG funds chiefly over lackluster returns. The performance improved from 2022's lows, but they still lag behind their traditional peers. The median sustainable large blend equity fund gained 20.8% in 2023. So on average, they made a return of 20.8% on an annual basis for their money. That's lower than the 23.9% gains made by all types of funds overall. So why would you give up that additional 3%? There's no reason for it. A lack of clear cross-border regulation over greenwashing when companies make false claims about their environmental standards also hurt demand. Questions about the future of sustainable finance persist in the U.S. as lawmakers from more than a dozen states from Florida to Utah try to fight the incorporation of ESG principles into business and investing. Quote, especially within the U.S., continued policy scrutiny of sustainable and ESG strategies contributed to a chilling effect on demand for these funds, she wrote in her report. The weak period for ESG funds has been notable given the massive growth they've posted in recent years. ESG investing boomed in the pandemic when lockdowns caused energy prices to fall and buoyed portfolios that shun fossil fuels. The same strategies have floundered as lockdowns ended and economic activity resumed. The amount invested in U.S. sustainable funds totaled $323 billion by the end of 2023, 12% lower than the record-setting amount invested in 2021. Quote, we saw such strong inflows between 2019 and 2021. Quote, it's not as though all of those investors that started allocating to sustainable funds are all of a sudden running for the exits. The underperformance of ESG-focused funds strikes at the heart of a core argument of ESG that investors are rewarded by investing in do-good companies. While many nations are ramping up renewables and scrapping carbon-producing power stations, the transition is not smooth and near-term shocks hinder progress. Millennials and Gen Zers are turning their backs on ESG funds faster than others, according to new research. A survey of some 1,000 investors found that millennials and Gen Z respondents had started to allocate their money more like baby boomers, who actually want to make money on their own personal investments. People want to be able to retire. They want to get a return on their investment. They don't want to be risking their investments. The ESG thing is a scam. We all know it's not working. Previously, young investors said they were very concerned about environmental and social issues and wanted their fund managers to push for change, even if it meant a loss of personal wealth. That sentiment has changed, though, dramatically. In a survey, preference for ESG investing among millennials and Gen Zers who are aged between 18 and 41 fell sharply. The share of those who said they were very concerned about environmental issues dropped from 70% in 2022 to 49% last year. The share of those who were worried about social issues fell from 65% to 53%. When it's all theoretical and it doesn't affect your own money or your ability to retire, everyone says, sure, let's do nice things for everyone. I want to do nice things for everyone, but ESG is not the way. DEI is not the way. The woke need to be shut down, like we do on this channel, wokeshutdown.com. From Fox Business, costly ESG standards climate policies will ultimately reduce food and energy supplies. Texas Agriculture Commissioner says ESG policies, quote, will have a devastating impact on U.S. agriculture and world food security. Well, that sounds like a problem. Climate change policies and environmental, social, and governance standards will have an outsized negative impact on the U.S. agricultural industry, according to a new report shared with Fox Business. The report, published by think tank Buckeye Institute, is titled Net Zero Climate Control Policies Will Fail the Farm, and outlines how farmers will see their operational costs rise by an estimated 34% as a result of net zero ESG policies. While the report states its findings were predictable and unsurprising, it added that U.S. policymakers seem, quote, unwilling to address or even acknowledge them. Government climate control policies ensconced in the Paris Climate Accords, the Inflation Reduction Act, and ESG-guided mandates carry a heavy price tag, especially for U.S. farmers and the American consumer. Quote, Europe has tested many of these policies aggressively for years, and the results have been an unmitigated failure, they continued. Despite these resounding warnings from European counterparts, U.S. policymakers have recommitted American industry to the same net zero emission standards and have imposed the same kinds of costly mandates on farms and businesses that will ultimately reduce food and energy supplies without achieving their intended benefits. As a result, diesel fuel prices needed for trucks, tractors, and combines increased, propane needed for power grain dryers and heat barns increased in price, and prices for the nitrogen fertilizer needed to grow crops also rose. The report further modeled the impact those heavier cost burdens would have on the consumer, showing the average American family of four's household grocery bill would increase by roughly $1,300 per year. Overall, the prices of common grocery items, including American cheese, would increase 78%, beef would increase by 70%, rice would tick up 56%, chicken would see a 39% increase, and eggs would be 36% more expensive. Foods that require more carbon-intensive processes to produce saw the largest uptick in prices. From the Princeton Tory Go Woke and Go Broke Why ESG is doomed to fail. The debate on environmental, social, and governance policies is not a new one. Nearly 50 years ago, economist Milton Friedman wrote a famous op-ed arguing against the adoption of ESG in the business world. Amidst the burgeoning ESG initiatives of the 1970s, surrounding South African apartheid and the Vietnam War, Friedman argued that businesses should not engage in such seemingly noble efforts, instead believing that the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. Friedman likened business involvement with political and social causes to pure and unadulterated socialism that undermines the basis of free society. For many, this claim may seem hyperbolic. Why shouldn't large, often greedy global corporations pay back to society with the products of their success? Yet the past half-century of ESG efforts have indeed proven Friedman's thesis correct or even prophetic. In recent years, major companies and investment funds have increasingly prioritized the social responsibility aspect of the ESG framework, even at the expense of maximizing profits. Yet, as Friedman notes, it is paradoxical to argue that corporations are obligated to pursue an ambitious social good. Individuals making up the corporation, executives, employees, shareholders, and consumers, certainly have their own varied ideas of their social responsibilities. However, the corporation itself is ultimately bound to the common denominator that unites all these stakeholders: profit. When corporate executives implement ESG policies, they may, in some cases, bring about some external good for the world. However, in doing so, they must spend someone else's money without consent, either by raising prices on consumers, reducing returns for stockholders, or lowering wages for workers. In this sense, Friedman accurately describes ESG as a socialist process, where businessmen effectively tax stakeholders without the accountability of an elected government. This tax was recently studied by former chief economist of the NASDAQ, Mike Edelson, and a former CEO of a Fortune 500 company, Andrew Putzer, in their study on the profitability of ESG investing. Their study analyzed the S&P 900 and mid-cap companies and found that the firms that remained neutral on political issues such as the environment, education, and abortion consistently outperformed the other firms that took both conservative or progressive stances. Quote, the data indicate that, as common sense would suggest, companies that focus on profits outperform companies that don't. In fact, over a 10-year span, the neutral portfolio significantly outperformed its peers, giving a return of 334% relative to the 220% return of the market. The story is the same for large retirement and teachers' pensions funds, which are increasingly facing pressure to hop on the ESG bandwagon and ignore their fiduciary obligations. Left-wing legislators and activists believe that climate and social justice activism should influence the decisions affecting millions of hardworking Americans' retirement savings without their consent. CEO and publisher Steve Forbes describes the phenomenon as politics polluting pension funds. As he puts it, quote, people don't want their Wall Street investment advisors to be distracted by saving the planet or ending society's ills. They just want the best possible return on their money. Many Americans agree with Forbes' assessment and are beginning to voice their concern over investment policies that jeopardize their savings. In response to the growing frustration surrounding ESG investing, two of the largest money management funds, Vanguard and BlackRock, have walked back their previously ESG-friendly policies, slashing the majority of climate and social proposals from their investment decisions. In addition to decreasing stakeholders or profits, ESG practices easily devolve into ideological agendas that pursue subjective social good. Policies that very clearly cater to progressive dogma alienate conservative consumers who have their own notions of the social good. Dubbed woke capitalism, social justice, ESG efforts advance partisan policies such as diversity, equity, and inclusion, LGBT, and fossil fuel divestment to unconsenting consumers. One notable example is Anheuser-Busch's recent Bud Light campaign, where transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney marketed a campaign to make the historic beer more inclusive. While this ideology may have been seen as good by corporate executives, consumers grossly disagreed. Following the campaign, Anheuser-Busch saw its revenue decline by more than 10% in the second quarter compared to the previous year, and its U.S. operating profit dropped nearly 30%. The story was similar for Target, which recently implemented an array of LGBT pride and transgender displays in their stores in the name of the social component of ESG. Disconnected and out-of-touch executives believed they were obligated to promote LGBT and transgender norms, even in the design of children's clothing. As one might expect, consumers retaliated with their purchasing power, and Target suffered a $10 billion loss of value in just 10 days. The subjectivity of the social good has led without fail to the corporate world accepting prevailing progressive ideas. Friedman argues that the clear and obvious solution to ESG subjectivity consists of businesses returning to the norms of the free market to maximize their profits and to offer the best and cheapest products possible relative to their competitors. Consumers reserve the right to spend money on the issues they care about and have confidence that their investments are not placed in the service of the ideals of the corporate executives. Proponents of ESG will counter these claims by saying certain issues such as the climate crisis are too urgent and catastrophic for companies to ignore. They argue that business, with their adaptability and resources, are better primed to tackle these issues than a sclerotic government hindered by lobbyists and the bureaucratic state. Thus, businesses must share the burden of creating a healthier or more sustainable future. However, Friedman rejects this in principle because if the desired policy cannot be achieved by democratic participation, then it is not popular enough to be implemented and likewise should not be done through business action. Even with its imperfections, the democratic process ensures an accountability that cannot be replicated in the corporate structure. Policy by government action may be an imperfect option, but the safeguards of democracy make it the least harmful alternative to corporate influence. Friedman summarized this reality in his op-ed writing, quote, "In a free society, it is hard for good people to do good. But that is a small price to pay for making it hard for evil people to do evil, especially since one man's good is another's evil." Alternatively, some will argue that there is no harm if stockholders or customers consent completely to paying more for an eco-friendly product or taking a dividend cut for the sake of reducing emissions. As Friedman argues, the true social responsibility of business remains to maximize profits within the boundaries of the free market, allowing individuals to pursue the responsibilities they deem best for themselves. With regard to corporate virtue signaling and pushing ideological agendas, it would be best for woke executives of today to learn a lesson from Michael Jordan. In response to pressure to endorse Democrat Harvey Gantt in the 1990 North Carolina Senate race, Jordan declined to get his sneaker business involved in politics and was quoted saying, quote, "Republicans buy sneakers too. So too should today's businesses focus on the bottom line and reject ESG." Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up and I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.